Okay.
Good afternoon. I have the lovely Phil with me. Hello, Phil. Would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Good afternoon. I'm just a regular guy. I'm a husband, a father of two. I've got a day job, and very strangely, I sort of fell into writing. It was probably 11 years ago I actually started to think about writing, and then my first book was published in 2015, and I've just been sort of like writing ever since. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Did you always know that you wanted to write?
No, not at all. It's like it came to me when I was on honeymoon in 2010. So I'd had a few ideas about like short stories probably back in 2009, and I just played around with them and just thought, actually, this is sort of quite fun. And then I was on honeymoon on a sun lounger in Mauritius, where I should have been thinking about, sun cocktails, all that sort of stuff. And I just had this sort of idea about sort of like abductions, sort of high profile abductions that we've all seen around the world, and just started thinking, I wonder if I could sort of spin a tale where the abductions are a bit more sort of supernatural and involved things like vampires and sort of doorways to other like realms. And I just sort of sat there for 2 weeks, not constantly thinking about this. I mean, I had a new wife, and we were enjoying ourselves, but like when you sat there and you're just enjoying the sun and you're chilling out, it just sort of these little ideas kept dropping into my head. And then I think when I got back, I just started to write things down, and then it sort of took about 3 or 4 years to actually write that book, because children came along and life happened, and I would just spend, like a couple of hours, like every week or every other week, just sort of like trying to write stuff down. And then it got to a point where I'd finished it and thought, okay, well, it's done. And I didn't really know what to do with it. And then a friend that lives over the road from where I am now, she'd just written a book. She was like a retired GP, and she said she'd like written her memoirs. And then Angie said, he's written a book as well. And I went, oh, I don't say anything, because he's probably awful, and it's just a little like a guilty pleasure. And then she said, well, you have to publish it. And that's sort of what I did. I didn't have a clue what I was doing. I still probably don't, to be honest, but yeah, that's what I did, and that's how it all began.
And then, as we said before, you've got a new book out on Monday. So what number book is that?
So that's called Ashes of Innocence. That will be my 6th book that I've ever released. So it was previously self-published about 18 months ago. I think I first self-published it. And it did okay. It got some really good feedback. And then I thought, well, it's been self-published. It sort of sat there on its own. It doesn't really have its own home. What shall I do with it? And then, of course, I saw last year that Spellbound was starting up, and thought, okay, I'll test the water, and sent it off, and they said, yeah, we really like it. So yeah, that will be the 6th book that I've had released. I've got 5 previous books with like another publisher, so they're like my vampire-y sort of horror-y ones, and there's a sci-fi book as well, which is like a one-off that I did. So that's still sat with them. And then it will be book 6 coming out again on Monday. Book 7, I think, is in June. That's called His Dark Shadow. Book 8, which is called The Retreat, I think is due out sometime in the autumn. So it's a busy year.
Wow.
Because 2021 was really not busy. I didn't release anything. We were going through what we're going through, and I just thought, well, if I'm not going to release anything, at least I need to, keep active. So I've just been like writing when I can.
And these ones are more psychological, aren't they? You've moved away from your supernatural sort of genre.
Yeah, I mean, I love writing these sort of, the vampire-y ones, because I grew up with sort of Stephen King, Salem's Lot, that's probably showing my age, but that was what I loved when I was a kid. So when I started writing, that's all I wanted to write. And I enjoyed writing them. But then I got to a point where I thought, well, I would like to try something sort of different. And I've got author friends, for example, like Sue Watson, who, is in the sort of like writing community. She wrote, like romantic, comedies and, like quite light-hearted stuff. And then she suddenly switched to psychological thrillers and she did it really, really well. So, perhaps that's where I'm going to sort of head that way for a bit. I don't know how long I'll head that way. I may end up doing something else, not, cookery books, and I don't think I'm really cut out for like erotica, but yeah, I'll probably stick with this genre for a bit.
If you were to take a character out from any of the books you've written so far, who would you choose and what would you ask them?
Well, that's a good one. I'd probably take Wilf out. He was in my first books and he was from another realm. So he suddenly got mixed up with this whole vampire sort of thing. And the hero of the book's called Jake. They sort of become really close, but he's a really sort of oldie worldy, simple character, but quite dry wit. And yeah, I'd just probably like to have a conversation with him to say, how does it compare now that you're, got club card points instead of having to go and hunt your own meals? And yeah, I'm sure wherever he is, he's happy and he would be great company.
And if you were to be picked up and transported as a character into any of your books, which book would you choose?
Well, that's not a very easy choice because generally the characters in my books don't have a really nice time. They normally end up dead or go through trauma. I'd probably say the first book, Unknown, because, if somebody opened the doorway in a forest to like a magical land filled with vampires and monsters, yeah, it'd be terrifying, but certainly be worth a trip, wouldn't it? I just have to make sure I'm fully equipped with everything I'd need to survive, Mars bars and steaks and crucifixes.
Maybe the wrong priorities. Perhaps you need to reverse the priorities there. I see Mars bars are obviously.
I need to eat, don't I? And I'm not going to hunt. I'm just not cut out for that. So, yeah. So that's probably what I choose.
If you were to fictionally murder someone, how would you do it?
Oh God, is this being recorded? I don't know. I mean,
fictionally is fine. Totally absolves you of any guilt.
I'd probably just shoot them, or something quick. I couldn't do something slow, torturous, or strangle someone because that takes time and effort. If somebody just gave me a gun and said shoot that bad guy, okay, that's probably the limit. I'm probably not inventive where I'd want to sort of have them in a room chained up with like Saw, when like a circular saw comes down from the top and slices them in half. No, just quick shot, dead, move on.
We're very different in this, I think. Very different to what I would do, but anyway.
Okay, I best not get on your wrong side then.
I'm lovely, just yeah. And if you were fictionally murdered, who would you want to investigate your case?
Oh, probably Gina Hart from Karla Kovach's detective novels, because she might not always be the happiest, sort of detective, but she would get the job done. And she always likes cake. So, I know that she'd prioritize me probably in between the cake or after the cake. So I know that she'd crack the case and she'd, be full of sugar doing it.
Out of all the books you've written so far, what's the most fun scene you've written and what was the most difficult?
The most fun thing was probably with the vampire books, because there was very little research needed, because it was literally my own world I could create. So there was a bit of research for stuff in this world, like, old clocks and old cameras and a bit of Google Earth, because I'm quite well traveled. But there were places that I've not been to that I needed to look at, places like Puerto Rico. So I had to go into Google Earth and look at all that. So that was fun. But it isn't as easy as just having this world that you created, when you can just do whatever you want and no one will really sort of question. So that's the fun part. What was the other part you did ask me? I've just got lost.
The most difficult.
Probably when you've got a character that's a police officer. So in the new book, The Retreat, there's more police officers in that than generally my other books. So you have to do some sort of research on sort of like, the correct wording, because it isn't going to be, all right, you're nicked and down the station. You need to know what they will say, how the sort of procedures would sort of work. So yeah, that's the trickier part. And there's a good Facebook page called Cops and Writers where you can go in and ask questions. So yeah, it's enjoyable, but that's when you know that I've got to get this right, and you need to perhaps run it by a few people so they can say, yeah, that's sort of plausible. Because if it's not plausible, then you're just going to either lose your audience or you'll get scathing reviews saying this guy doesn't know what he's talking about.
What's the most interesting thing you found out doing research, or what's the biggest research rabbit hole you've fallen down?
Well, I'm a bit of a sci-fi nerd. So when I wrote Zoo, which is the sci-fi book, I've already loved watching things like Carl Sagan, Brian Cox, but I had to research things like wormholes and warp drive and sort of how could you get from one point in space to the other light years away, instantaneously. So I spent quite a lot of time trying to sort of like figure that out. And then it's not until you figure all that stuff out, which is stuff that I already sort of knew, that you think, really, there's just so much here. So like when you watched, I don't know, say if you watch Star Wars and the Millennium Falcon's going at light speed and you think, wow, that's super fast. Really, it's not going to get you anywhere fast. So I had to sort of, make sure that all the stuff that was in that book would sort of theoretically sort of hold up. If someone was a bit of a sci-fi geek as well reading it, they're not just going to go, this is dreadful. So yeah, that was a bit time consuming and I got a bit lost in that one.
Did you find writing the sort of more police and psychological books harder, or did you enjoy it just as much?
I think I enjoyed it. There is that edge to it that, you've got to get this right. So, I mean, generally in the books that I write, it's more about the characters that are doing the good or the bad things. And there may be sort of police officers sort of on the fringes. So with Ashes of Innocence, it's a story about, fundamentally 2 or 3 characters, sort of John, Lottie and Sean. So really, it's, even though it's told in a third person, it really centers on them. And then you do get, police officers in there, but you just need to try and make sure that, they sound believable, and someone's not going to read it and go, well, this is clearly just absolute rubbish. But yeah, I generally tend to focus on, the characters themselves. I don't think I'd be able to do, like a Karla Kovacs and write purely about, police, because I just haven't got that experience and background. So I'll stick to, killing people with, various implements and all the stuff that goes with that.
When you're editing your books, what's your most overused word or phrase?
Well, when I edited the one book a few years ago, I just was editing it and I just did like a find to sort of see what words I could sort of change. And I think I'd put said in there about 1,260 times. But right, okay, this isn't great. So I had to literally go through the whole thing again and try to replace said with she replied, or she countered, or he chirped in, or he piped up, or so that's when you write, you're sort of a bit blind to it. And it's not until you go back and you go, wow, really?
Yeah, ouch. Although I hear different things about that. Like sometimes people say you should use said because people just gloss over it because they expect to see it. And then other people say you should try and use different words. So I don't know what's right in that. It's very confusing.
Yeah, I don't know if is like a right or wrong answer. You've just got to do what you think's right, and then at some point editors and proofreaders will pick it up, and if they think it's a they know what they're doing. I just sit and write the thing.
Have you made lots of author friends since you started writing?
Yeah, from the start there was always sort of like author friends that I sort of like met online, and then some of them sort of drift away. I mean, that's normal, and you sort of I've got author friends from the very start that aren't really authors anymore, but I'm still friends with them. But it was maybe their one book and then they went off and did something else. But certainly over the years I've met some really, really good friends, sort of like in person as well, that are classed as true friends. And it's largely a great community. And there's people like AJ Griffiths Jones, who's a really lovely friend, Carla and Brooke. I'm probably going to miss people out, but people like Julia Sutton, who's a fantastic author. So it is great because they all support you and they pull around you, and that's really, really good to see. For that, it is a really supportive community.
Do you get a lot of feedback from readers?
Not really, just the reviews, really. I mean, I don't really hear from readers. I mean, I'm probably not at that stage where readers would email. I'm not like a big time author. I'm just, sort of finding my way. So yeah, I don't really hear, maybe from ARC readers when I send it out as a sort of draft, and then they may say, well, actually that isn't really correct. Can you go and have a look at that? Or, so yeah, it's generally the reviews and the ARC readers where I get my feedback.
Have you ever had any weird or strange feedback in your reviews?
Yeah, so for the sci-fi one, so when it was published, my publisher, Wisdom, decided to classify it as a young adult book, but it's not young adult. So there's there's a bit of sex in it, there's lots of swearing, there's lots of deaths, some of them quite grisly. And I had some reviews from the States saying, man, this guy drops the F-bomb every 10 seconds. I thought this was for kids. So I think I had to go back to my publisher and say, this was never meant for like 13-year-old kids. This is an adult book. So yeah, I've had that sort of feedback. I've also had a few people contact me saying that I portrayed them in a book as a crackhead, and the FBI is going to be like knocking on my door. So you get that from time to time. You'll get somebody that will sort of say something like that, but generally it's largely positive.
Wow. Oh, FBI on your door. You must be doing something bad.
Yeah, perhaps she thought I was in America. She said, well, it's probably going to be like MI5 or the police, not FBI. It's a bit strange.
Yeah, I don't think they could be asked really. I'm sure they've got much more important things to be worrying about.
Yeah, I think so.
If you're able to spend a day with any author, dead or alive, who would you like to spend a day with?
Ernest Hemingway. Purely because he was a great author. He was a man from a bygone time. I mean, yes, a lot of people wouldn't probably agree with his hunting. He used to go to Africa and shoot big game, but he was just an adventurer, and he wrote books. And I would quite like to spend an afternoon with him down on the Florida Keys, drinking like mojitos whilst looking out at the water, just chatting about stuff.
And if you were to meet any author now, who would you most fanboy over?
Probably, I mean, I've met indie authors and I generally fanboy over them and probably look a bit stupid. But if I was to meet one author, it would still be Stephen King. I'd love to meet Stephen King and just sort of sit there like a sort of gibbering idiot, telling him how much I've loved all his books all over the years. And yeah, that would be that'd be a very interesting conversation. And yeah, I would probably just be completely starstruck.
Did you see his panel at Bloody Scotland with Linwood Barclay?
Say that again, sorry.
Did you see his panel at Bloody Scotland with Linwood Barclay?
No.
It was a hybrid festival, so you could have watched it. Him and Linwood Barclay were comparing toilet stories.
Oh, right, okay, lovely.
Yeah, so, just if we all put Stephen King on this pedestal, and then, he was comparing toilet stories with Linwood Barclay. It was very funny and very bizarre.
That probably just shows he's still a normal sort of guy, even if he's, a multi-million selling author.
Yeah, he was sitting there in some Scottish football shirt as well. So, he's just cool, classy guy.
Yeah, he certainly is.
If you're able to travel to any period of time, either forwards or backwards, where would you like to go to?
I'd like to have said the future because that would be cool, but I'd like to go back to the sort of when we started setting out and journeying. So sort of like, 16th century where, we were going to far-flung places like, Southern Africa and exploring the sort of, the wilderness, and there's pirates and adventure on the high seas. And that would have been quite fun. I could quite see myself on like a galleon sort of shape, sailing around this, the Cape of Good Hope and just having a sort of jolly good time with lots of rum.
What's the funniest or strangest place you've ever woken up?
It was probably when I was because I went traveling years ago and I went to Namibia, which is in the southern west sort of part of Africa, so right down by South Africa. And we were at a car for 10 days with my ex-girlfriend, and we sort of drove around the country, and we stayed in a camp in the middle of the Namib desert. And when we got there, they said, well, there's your sort of like your accommodation. And it was like a bamboo sort of apex sort of frames. So we slept in there. It was very uncomfortable. There was no mattress, so you had to sleep in your sleeping bag. I didn't sleep at all well. And when I woke up in the morning and sort of shuffled my way to the edge of the sort of frame and, to get out, there was elephant pads all around where we were. There's elephant pads next to my car. And I was like, wow, they must have walked through in the middle of the night, heard me snoring, and just ran off.
At least you didn't scare him enough to wake you up and attack you or anything.
No, but I'm glad the elephants were there because they, probably would have kept the lions away. So that was a good thing.
Yeah. Awesome. That sounds really cool. You said at the beginning that you were widely travelled. So is there anywhere that you haven't been that you'd love to go to?
I've never been to America. So I've never been west. I've always gone east or south or north. So somewhere where I'd love to go to places like, I'd love to go to New York. It just looks magical whenever you see it on, on the movies and stuff. Somewhere like San Francisco, I'd love to go there. But I'd love to go to like the Midwest and just go into a bar in a cowboy hat where there's a pool table and just sit at the bar, just drinking beer. I'd probably be in my element. That would be great.
Until you spoke, and then all the weird Americans would be like, oh my God, cheesy British person invading our...
Yeah, maybe, yeah. So I'd have to have an escape plan.
They love our accent. I've only been to Florida, and it was awesome. But as soon as they know you're British, they're like, oh my God, and yeah, it's bad.
Yeah, at some point, sometime I will get there. So that's, the one thing I would like to, go is to travel to North America. I mean, even South America, because I'd love to go to places down there. So that'd be great. So fingers crossed.
If I was to ask your darling wife or those closest to you what your most annoying habit is, what would they say?
Will probably be that. So that's a electronic cigarette. So actually, yeah, they hate that. So that's my one. Well, it's probably, there's others that I'm sure I can't remember at the moment, but yeah, that's probably the one. Is I do vape.
Who was your who was your first celebrity crush?
Oh, now this is going back a little bit. So I mean, probably Sally James from Tiswas. Now, some people might not know who that is, but in the sort of late 70s and early 80s, there was a Saturday morning show called Tiswas, which was just carnage. It was people hitting people with custard pies and the Phantom Flanflinger, and it was mental. But Sally James was like the co-host with Chris Tarrant. And it was funny how, my dad was always watching it with me. And I didn't realise at the time, I just thought she was gorgeous. And then years gone by, everyone sort of said, oh yeah, Sally James just sit there on a Saturday morning with my dad, for support. And it was like, no, he was just ogling her because she was beautiful. So that was the first one.
I'm going to have to look her up, actually. One person I don't really know. I know the name, but can't picture her. So,
yeah, I mean, she's probably 70 now. So I'd have to Google her later.
Do you want to tell us a little bit more about Ashes of Innocence?
Can I put spoilers in? Do I need to try and, a light touch?
I mean, it's your book. Do whatever you wish.
Okay, so it's a story about abduction. So I won't give too much away, but one of the main characters, John Wilson, is fighting in Afghanistan at the start. He's part of the Royal Marines, and his wife and daughter are living in Birmingham, and they go shopping in the sort of like in the city sort of centre, like a shopping mall. And the daughter gets abducted by two brothers. So we'll fast forward that part, but then obviously something quite bad happens, and then John has to come home from Afghanistan to realise that his family's been torn apart and his world's been turned upside down. And then it's about, it's like about him, how he comes to terms with his grief, and also how he adapts to civilian life now. So, he has to get a job, and, it's all really new for him. I almost let something slip then, I didn't. It's all really new for him. And then it also focuses on the sort of, the two brothers and their trajectory through the next sort of 12 years. The book spans 12 years. And also the boy's mother, who she's quite a large character in it at the start. You don't really sort of think she's a nice person. She's, into all sorts of things, but she tries to rebuild her life afterwards. And it's quite sort of gritty in places. And I've tried to sort of set it in various parts of the UK. So there's some that's set in sort of Birmingham, there's some that's set in Scotland, and it's quite fast paced, especially in sort of areas, but then it does sort of slow itself down, to focus on the characters. But I really writing it. I was quite proud when I sort of released that, because I thought, this is completely different to anything I've ever done before, but really, really worthwhile doing it.
Well, I'm on the blog tour for it, so I'm looking forward to reading it and reviewing it for you at some point. I don't know when, soon. I've got a list that's like this of blog tours, so yeah.
We've all got this TBR list that keeps growing and growing and growing.
Well, I've got TBR list, which is like, and then blog tour list. They're two separate things for me. I can't remember the last time I picked up a book that I wanted to read, that like through my own choice, instead of thinking I've got to read this one next because it's next on the list.
Yeah, I know. We're all in that same boat.
Good job, we love it, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Well, you may be relieved to know that I don't have any more questions for you, unless you think there's anything I haven't asked you that you want to tell us.
Right, okay. That seems to have whizzed past.
It does, doesn't it? Yeah.
It does. So no, I don't think I've got any questions for you apart from what you're having for tea later.
You know what? I actually have no idea at the minute. I want fajitas, but it means I have to go buy wraps and I can't be asked to leave the house. So
Okay, I'm not sure what we're having yet. I think my wife's coming back from the supermarket in about an hour, so we'll go from there.
awesome. Well, before we go, would you like to tell everyone where they can find out more about you and where they can get your books from?
Okay, well, I mean, I'm on Amazon, so if you type my name in, you'll sort of, you'll see my books, you'll see my Amazon page. I mean, I'm on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, not TikTok. I don't really like doing that or the dancing stuff, but yeah, I'm on sort of like the sort of like writing community sort of circuit, I suppose you'd call it, or the community. So probably Facebook is probably the best place to find me. And if anyone is on the Fiction Cafe page, or they see Spellbound stuff, or just general book pages, I'm generally sort of on there, so they should be able to find me and see what I think.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dana. It's been a lovely afternoon chatting with you.
Mhm.